ready to dive into another fascinating life. This time we're heading to 18th century Saint-Domingue.
A society on the brink. Lots of tension. The beginnings of revolution.
And right in the thick of it, you have Marie Catherine Kingué.
Finding her story, it really makes you wonder how anyone navigated those complexities.
She's living in a world of slavery, yet she becomes this powerful healer, a diviner. There's so much to unpack.
Absolutely. And where we start, I think, is this incredible act of defiance.
Her name.
Exactly.
She's given the slave name Marie Catherine, but she chooses to be known as Kingué.
Holds on to that Kongolese identity.
Powerful. In that time, in that place, what does that say about her?
We can only try to imagine the psychological impact. They tried to strip these individuals of everything, their humanity, their heritage, but she held on to that name.
It's a shield.
A declaration. And honestly, it speaks volumes about Kingué, her strength, her sense of self.
It makes you wonder about what else she overcame, because we even have that runaway ad from years earlier mentions Kingué, possibly her.
It's a possibility that sends shivers down my spine.
Escaping the slave trade, and not just any slave trade. We're talking about the brutality of the Malemba port.
It adds another dimension to her story, don't you think?
If she's this Kingué, her story becomes even more incredible.
Because the name links her to that specific port, the Congolese kingdom of Kakongo, a major hub for the slave trade.
This is someone who is determined to define herself. And that leads us to her time on the plantation.
Where she carves out this space for herself. She develops a reputation, right?
Healing, herbalism, even divination.
She was sought after.
The sources mention caprolata and hospitaliere. I have to admit, those terms, they're new to me. What do they tell us?
It's a glimpse into a time where African and colonial influences were bumping up against each other constantly.
A fascinating mix, to say the least.
And I think you're right. Fascinating is a good word for it. Caprolata, it seems to refer to something ancient. Knowledge rooted in Congolese traditions, passed down through generations.
And then hospitaliere, that feels much more European.
Right. It suggests this connection to their ideas of healing, caretaking.
So she's navigating both of these worlds.
Adapting, integrating different practices, trying to find her way in a really complex environment.
It's an environment where poisoning is a constant fear. The sources, they really highlighted this anxiety among the white planter class.
They were terrified of it.
It's a bit unsettling, because King is the one they trust to root out this poison.
Imagine having that power to hold someone's fate in your hands.
But it's not a clean story. She participates in these rituals. People are tortured. They die.
And this is where things get really complicated, ethically speaking.
Definitely.
The source describes this one case. A slave owner, convinced his workers are trying to poison him. He lets Kingué conduct this entire ritual. The tension in that moment.
The fear.
It just lays bare the brutality of the system.
But it also raises questions about Kingué's role, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, was she forced to comply? Was she a victim of circumstance, or was there something else going on?
It's almost impossible to know for sure.
And then there's that story about the pregnant woman giving birth to a snake.
Yeah, whether or not you believe in the supernatural, a story like that is going to get around.
It's going to cement your reputation. And it tells us something about the time period. Illness, misfortune, it was all seen through a very specific lens.
Spiritual warfare.
Exactly. And in that world, Kingué becomes this powerful figure, someone who understands these hidden forces. She's both fascinating and terrifying.
And her story takes this really interesting turn when she moves to Plaisance.
No longer on the plantation, remember. She's living with the militia commander, Chaillot.
Living a very different life. It makes you wonder, how does a woman, still technically enslaved, end up in that position?
Right. The level of agency she displays, it's incredible. You don't see that very often, especially not for a black woman during that time.
So was this all Chaillot? Or had she been building up her own network, cultivating influence all along?
It's a question worth considering, because it's not just about where she's living. Her clientele starts to change during this time, too. It expands.
It's not just those enslaved Africans seeking her out anymore.
You have white colonists, free people of color. They're all drawn to her.
Maybe some are hoping for healing, others protection.
Or a glimpse into the spiritual realm. Remember those trance states, the talismans? There's something about Kingué that clearly resonated with people from all walks of life.
But that growing reputation, that visibility, it becomes a problem. There are complaints about her influence. People are afraid.
Especially her influence over those on the plantations. Remember, this is a society built on a very particular power structure.
And they're worried about her potential to disrupt it, to incite revolt.
Which makes sense when you think about the context. Senabing, in the late 1700s, it was a powder keg waiting to explode.
The white planter class, they were outnumbered. Simple as that.
They lived with this constant fear. Uprising was always a possibility.
And Kingué, with her growing following, her connection to those African traditions,
And her ability to move between these different worlds, she embodied those anxieties.
she challenged the very foundation of their society.
And that's a dangerous thing, to challenge those in power.
It's tragic, isn't it? The very things that made her extraordinary, that allowed her to rise above, they end up leading to her downfall.
It's a tale as old as time. Fear and power, they go hand in hand.
And it all comes crashing down with these accusations.
They start calling her names, a hussy, a charlatan, anything to discredit her,
To turn people against her?
to dismantle that community she built. But even with those accusations,
There's fear, isn't there?
oh, absolutely, they knew what they were doing. They even talk about potential backlash, people being afraid to speak out against her.
It's like they know they're trying to take down someone extraordinary.
Someone who defied the odds, carved out her own space, and they couldn't stand it.
And then the trail goes cold. It's just silence.
We have that one description of her in the trial transcript.
A negress, or rather, a monster.
Chilling.
Dehumanizing.
And then nothing. What happened to her?
It's deafening, isn't it? That silence makes you think about all the stories lost to history.
All the voices we'll never hear.
Were the records deemed insignificant, lost, destroyed?
It makes you wonder, whose stories are considered worthy? Whose voices get to echo through time? We have these fragments, these glimpses into Kingué's life.
She refused to be defined by the brutality of her time.
We use these pieces to ask questions, to challenge the narratives we think we know.
To understand the past.
Because she resisted. Every day. Just by being herself. By finding her own power.
In a system that tried to deny her that right.
Kingué's story, it reminds us that history isn't simple.
It's messy, complicated.
Full of whispers and silences.
We have to listen closely.
To honor those who were silenced. To uncover their stories.
Read Catherine Kingué's story might be unfinished.
But her legacy, that sense of defiance, of resilience.
That's all we carry with us.
The power of the human spirit. Don't ever forget that.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another look at the lives that shaped our world. Until then, keep exploring and keep asking questions.